Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of Ministry Mix, where we're bringing you real conversations for the souls and strategies of ministry leaders. My name is Phil Gifford, and I'm joined by the one and only my co-host, Richard Pope. And so whether you are a seasoned, experienced, broken, beat-up pastor, or a brand new, excited ministry leader stepping into church leadership for the first time, we're here to help you, encourage you. We're here to share stories, insights, and hopefully some practical tips to help you lead more strategically while caring for your soul. So each episode, we're going to dive into some topics that hopefully you're having with others or you want to have with others to help you grow in your mission and your calling and just your own personal life. So we're excited to get this podcast started. It's been a long time dream, but before we get into today's topic, Richard, I feel like we should talk about what in the world this podcast is all about and what's the deal with this podcast and who we are, these voices that people will be listening to. So what's the deal with this podcast?
The deal with this podcast is I'm hanging out with Phil.
It's a good excuse to get together in my house, right?
Yeah. Actually, I think the goal, for me at least, is that we would have conversations that pastors need to have. So we're inviting them into our conversation, hoping that they can benefit from it and grow in it. I know in my ministry journey, Phil and I have had a lot of conversations about the topics we're going to be talking about. So there's benefit and so much hope in conversating with a brother or a sister in ministry and just working through things. So we're hoping that we can invite you into things we're working through at our churches.
Yeah, throughout the 3 or 4 years we've known each other, since 2020, 2021, 2020,
COVID.
We've been kind of phone buddies, calling buddies, video game buddies. We've Fortnite buddies. We will get into Fortnite, but we got to save that. We can't do that in the first episode. But we've fleshed out our struggles, we've fleshed out our strategies, and so we thought we've said for several years we should start a podcast. Well, today we're starting the podcast.
And if you like it, you should subscribe.
Absolutely. You should subscribe. You should share it with your ministry leaders, your pastor friends, and hopefully join in the conversations. And feel free, if you're following us on social media, tell us some of the topics you want us to talk about, because we want this to be not just things that we're thinking of, but things that you're also dealing with and processing through. So we'd love to have a few new topics to jump into.
Can I add something?
Of course.
If you don't like it, don't email us.
You should definitely email Richard. And I don't even know his email, but you should definitely email Richard.
Phil Gifford at connectingchurch.com.
That is not a real email, but you should send it anyways. So what are you hoping to do? What do you hope this podcast does for people who are listening?
Yeah, I hope it leads them to have better conversations with leaders in their church. I think a lot of times, for me at least, I struggle in silence. I feel like that was the whole first year of my church planting journey. So Phil Gifford, the other guy on this podcast, Phil was my coach when I was planting a church and kind of did some training for me, helped assess me for church planting with said network. And what was crazy is I feel like for that first year, I would call Phil after I was already devastated. I would wait till like everything had blown up and I was freaking out. And eventually I learned if I just reach out and have these conversations sooner, that my soul's healthier, but also I make less stupid mistakes. So I hope it encourages people to have conversations.
That's right. And I would even add, for my benefit, even though I've talked Richard off a lot of different cliffs in his ministry, I feel like especially in that first year when you were like, dude, we had one bad Sunday, and you're like, I should probably just close down this church. I'm like, no, you definitely shouldn't. Like, it's one bad Sunday. But I've benefited from just more intentionality in my own ministry by having these conversations with you. So that's our goal for the podcast. I hope that you find that true. And again, we want to encourage you to subscribe and share it with others, because we want this conversation to reach as many leaders and help as many leaders as possible. So quick thoughts about who we are before we get into our topic. Again, my name's Phil Gifford, and I'm married to Pam, and I have 3 kids, Kaylin, Jackson, and Hannah. They're in high school, middle school, and elementary school. So we stay busy with all the different school things. Beyond my family, I am the pastor of Connecting Church. We planted this in Abingdon, Maryland, the Harford County area, about 7.5 years ago. And we've been striving and serving this community ever since. In addition to pastoring, I've had a chance to do some pretty cool things. I serve as an adjunct instructor at Liberty University. I feel like I've taught just about every class there, from like the introduction to the Bible all the way to dissertation, doctoral stage people. So it's like I got the whole gambit.
You're really smart.
I'm not that smart. I'm just average at a lot of things. And so they throw me into a lot of different roles. So I do that. I've worked also with the Sun Network in training and coaching and assessing and residencies, as well as the BCMD and consulting. So wearing a lot of different ministry hats, and thankful for the season and the experience God's given me. So who are you, Richard? Who's the lovely voice on the other side of this mic?
Richard.
Okay.
It's Richard. Yeah, I'm Richard, married to Peyton. I don't have kids, but I have a German Shepherd. Her name is Mirsha, and she is my favorite dog ever. I just want to make that very clear. If you're listening, Mirsha, I love you. And Peyton. Yeah.
We hear your priorities, though.
Very clear, very clear. I planted Canvas Church in 2021 after failing for 2 years to start a church. We started in 2019. It was miserable and horrible, and we did everything wrong. And then in 2021, we launched the church, and it's been great since. I also did some work for Sun Network. I do still as a multiplying pastor. So I help guys go through the process of planting a church, and then I'm the church planting leader for BCMD, which is a fancy way of saying I help people who want to plant churches start churches, and I help churches start churches. So that's Richard.
I love it.
And I love Mirsha and Peyton. And yes. Peyton and Mirsha.
However you want to put it. Do you think Peyton will listen to this podcast?
Peyton will tell me she listened to the podcast.
I think
I'll quiz her.
I think that might be where Pam's at too. She might listen to the podcast, but I don't know that she's going to be like day one subscriber.
We'll beg them.
Absolutely. we'll have to like take them out for dates or something to listen to the car ride over there, like a far away drive.
Hot pot.
That's where we go. So, hey, here's today's topic. For our first episode, we thought a combination of some soul care thoughts, but also just a way to maybe get to know our stories better. And we wanted to focus in on how our pasts influence the way we lead and pastor. So again, we're kind of looking into our self-awareness, our souls, because the truth is your story and the things that have happened to you, the experiences you've gone through, impact the way you lead, probably in ways that you are aware of, and also in many ways that you are not aware of. So each of us have kind of come up with 3 different stories from our past that have shaped the way we think about ministry, we lead in ministry, and sometimes in a good way, and sometimes in some hard ways that we've had to overcome. So our goal is for you to think through your past and for you to think through your story and some of your more reactive ministry moments or some of your more ministry leaning, whatever you want to call it. We want you to be able to think through your own life and apply that to how you lead. So I'll go first. How's that sound? Or do you want to go first?
You go first.
All right. So I will go first. I come from a pastor family. My story is different than Richard's, and we'll get into that. But I come from a good old church family. In fact, I'm a 3rd generation preacher. My grandfather on my mom's side my mom's dad was a preacher. She was born into a pastor's home, into a parsonage. Then my dad was a pastor, and then now I wasn't seeking to be a pastor, but that's the way God led my life. And so I come from a pastoral home, but it seems like the story of my childhood and my dad's pastorate has been one of rocky situations. Like we'd land in a church and he'd be faithful for 6-7 years preaching and sharing God's word faithfully and leading well. But at some point in that, like, I felt like that 6 to 10 year window, something chaotic would happen. We would have a deacon that had to be confronted that went ugly, or associate pastors that would run coups, or whatever it would be. Like it would end really poorly and really harmful and really hurtful for us. And some of my earliest memories of churches are my parents at really late business meetings where they were just berated by congregational members. In fact, I remember a story when I was like 12 years old, maybe someplace 10, 12 around there. We were at this church and some of the deacons were getting a little feisty and they had kids my age. And I don't know if they were instructed to bully me, but they certainly took advantage of that. You know how that stuff spills in. So I remember one Sunday morning, literally one of these deacon kids my age, like he was like 3 years older than me. So in my age in a youth group together, but like, not like I couldn't put up a fight. Like
deacon kid, pastor kid, that could raise some money.
Yeah. You like that? So anyways, like it was after church, we were all playing in the little fellowship hall and like, I don't know what happened, but he literally threw me in a closet and then barricaded the door so I couldn't get out. So I remember just kind of sitting in this closet going, this is church. This is church.
Wow.
And so it was funny. We moved on. I don't have any trauma from that I know of, but I did notice one of the lessons that I began to process through when I stepped into ministry is that about year 5 at a church, year 6 at a church, kind of around that window when our family would go through some kind of tragedy and have to move and do something different, I would get really itchy to move on to like, just like, I felt like I need to, like almost that flight mentality, like I need to find something new. And for a long time, I don't think this is necessarily wrong. I would equate it to a entrepreneurial new adventure, like, oh, I just need to go chase something new. But what I began to discover, especially after pushing through that window in our current church, was there was actually this underlying fear that churches will hurt you if you stay too long.
Wow.
And that people will betray you if you open up too much. And so it took me probably 15 years of ministry to realize God is faithful. You can stay. If it's time to go, it's time to go. But to confront some immaturity in me, that flight, basically I need to stay long enough to love the people well enough to push through that. And so that's something I had to realize about myself, is it's not just always God's call that was driving me, it was actually my fears that were driving me to new places. Because I served as a worship pastor for 4 years in a church, went to another church 2 years, served as a senior pastor for 5 years in a revitalization, and now we're almost 7 or 8 years into our church plant. And I've had to, like, around year 3 and 4 of this church plant, I was like, what's next?
Wow.
And I had to confront that because God called me to be here. So that's my story.
That's so good. Phil, I'm going to ask a question.
Sure.
This was not on our plan.
That's good.
What is one practical thing you learned from that experience in your past?
Yeah. I think the greatest benefit that I've learned was actually from the faithfulness of my parents.
Wow.
Like, my dad is still serving as a pastor today. He's 60 something. He's getting close to 70. I wish I knew his actual age, but I hope he
doesn't listen.
Oh, I'm sure he will eventually. But yeah, he's upper 60s. He could easily be retired right now.
Wow.
But he's serving in a church and just wants to be used by God. And so every time I saw him take a punch by the church, you know, some people, they get punched by the church and they just immediately blame God, run from the church. He never lost his love for Jesus and the local church.
Wow.
And so, like, that is a good lesson.
Yeah.
to literally watch people in the church, like, some nasty stuff.
Wow.
But, like, not lose your love for Jesus and really not lose your love for the local church.
That's beautiful.
So that's one of the biggest lessons I learned.
That's so good. And I think that's helpful for ministry leaders who may be struggling. Our church is 3.5 years old. And already we've had moments where, I'll be honest, where it's felt like the church has punched me or someone in the church has been angry, and my church could hear this. We're very open, but yes, that's encouraging to me as a pastor under 30. Your dad's at least twice as old as me, just to hear.
We should find the real math out and tell you exactly how old he is.
You should, just to hear that faithfulness. That's encouraging. That's encouraging.
So I think that number one takeaway is you don't have to hate the church if you're hurt by the church.
Whoa. That's a quote that's going on an Instagram
Let's do
post.
it.
You heard it here first, folks.
There we go. So how about you, Richard? What's a story from your past that has shaped the way you lead today?
Yeah, so I'm going to go straight to childhood. Different from Phil. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My mom had gone through a series of abusive relationships, had struggled with substance abuse. So my story of even, I heard once that your family is the shell of your yoke, right? Like, what are you born into is going to decide how safe you are, how stable you are. So I was born into a messy yoke. I was scrambled before I was born, is how I would say it. I really like eggs. That's something you can learn about me right now. I eat eggs every day. But yeah, so I was born, I love my mom. She was a single mom who tried hard, but we moved a lot. There were times where money was super tight. There were times where life didn't look like the American hallmark life. And I trigger warning, maybe I was sexually assaulted when I was 5, and that altered the way that I saw the world pretty early on. But in that same season when, assaulted by a family member, really traumatized, battling hallucinations, I mean, it really shattered my brain. And we already were unstable at my mom and I. It was already an unstable environment and living situations, and that just was blow up on top of it. But in that season, we were living in Seaford, Delaware. It's a small town on the west side of the bottom of Delaware. Old factory town. In 20, 30 years ago, a factory left DuPont and everybody became poor. So the city went from being one of the wealthiest cities in Sussex County, Delaware, to the poorest in a day. Everybody lost their jobs, but there was this lady who lived across the street from us in that season, and her name was Ruthie. And she kind of adopted me and my mom. She was like I called her Grandma Ruthie. And this lady would constantly be inviting people into her house, loving them. She died when I was 6 or 7, not long after I met her, honestly. But, every day I would get off the school bus and I would run into her house, and she was in a hospice bed. And, she would always have me read the Bible to her. And I didn't come from a Christian home, so this was just me doing this for my Grandma Ruthie. But I would read her a story, and then, it was like a children's Bible, and she would smile and she would muster up strength and she'd say something wise to me, but she always connected the truth from the Bible. Whatever the story was, she always connected it to other people, which was super influential. Even though I wasn't a Christian, for years later, I got saved when I was 15. When I came to Christ, my understanding of the Bible was, okay, this is what this says about God, but what does this say about how I treat other people? So that was a huge lesson for me, just in not just reading the word for myself, but reading the word to see people as God's image and beautiful and wonderful. And yeah, she would feed people and invite them over, and she'd give her last dollar to the homeless man who asked. She just was a beacon of light on this corner of this destitute town. So yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So she was on her hospice bed and doing all these things?
Yeah. I mean, she was spunky, man. She was spunky. She obviously, as it got closer to the end, did less and less and less. But every day I get off the bus, run into her house, it'd be right there, read to me, and I would read to her. And it was just the way that she applied the word of God to loving people. And that was like a foundational truth for me. So when I came to know Christ, it was like, whoa, my goal as a Christian is to love Jesus and love people. I didn't even know that was a verse in the Bible. I just knew that because of the way she lived it out. So lesson for me from that was, if the way we read the word doesn't change how we love people, then we're not reading the word, I don't think, properly. Furthermore, as a leader, constantly I encourage my people, hey, you need to read the Bible transformatively, that you become more like Christ and that the people around you know Jesus because of you.
So her influence and just her hospitality really shaped not only just gave you a hope in the brokenness of the world around you at the moment, but also taught you how to eventually pastor people.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, because that wasn't seminary. That wasn't a Bible class you took. That wasn't some influential pastor mentoring you. That was a Grandma Ruthie in the hospice
Ruthie Smallwood, an old lady who would always give me cookies and cream ice cream, and you tell me how to love people well. Yeah. So it's crazy because now, and Phil, I'm sure you have had this experience. You look back, hindsight's 2020, right? And you're like, I can see how that experience has led to this. At Canvas, we are super passionate about outreach, like you guys are connecting, but our approach to outreach is very micro, very small. I remember talking to you about this in the past. We just go hand out cookies or go hand out water. And I was like, I didn't get that from Outreach Magazine. I didn't get that from a trendy Instagram post. That came from Grandma Ruthie, who would just use small means of grace as a way to communicate a big gospel. So it stuck.
We often measure or aim for outreach. And we're going to do a podcast episode about this getting closer to Christmas.
Yes, we are.
But so I don't want to be careful not to dive into this, but we often equate outreach and teaching ministry with volume.
Yeah.
We had 7,000 people come to our outdoor movie night, and we are able to do a trunk or treat with half the town, and we measure that as success. Or we taught 500 people on Sunday, but some of the most meaningful and informative moments are that one-to-one. It's so good. And so how has that changed how you and Peyton particularly are practicing some of those lessons?
So just context that's really practical. Salisbury, micropolitan, so we're the urban core of a rural area. So you also have a lot of young people moving from Baltimore and DC and New York because of the universities. They stay because it's a cheaper cost of living. So where we are in Salisbury, we're downtown. How it affects how we live, neighborhood focused for us and our church, right?
You're right there.
Neighborhood focused. We're not trying to meet the needs of our city. And I know that's super 2024, what church plants do. We're trying to meet the needs of our block. And I'm like, if I love the block And if I bring people who don't live on my block into my church who love this block, this place will be a place of restoration and joy and peace and really practical means of grace. And then Peyton and I, same thing. Generosity is not an option for the Christian. Mm-hmm. So for our church and for us, we try to live generously, which I think leadership is modeled behavior, right? So we model that to our church, and our church seems to be doing it. So,
well, and I would even say when we've played video games together,
Fortnite.
We've had our
you say video games, we've only ever played Fortnite.
Let's clarify. When we play Fortnite together, like two grown men would, who are pastors,
till 1 a.m.
till unreasonable times for my age. But when we play Fortnite, there are many times where people, usually even the generation below you, are in your house. You and Peyton are taken care of, and so I see that modeled. Well, hey, those are two fun stories from our past, or a story from our past. We have two more stories each to share, but we want to save that for another podcast episode. So I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of Ministry Mix and found value in today's conversation. As we already said, and as I choke a little bit, I'm choked up already.
Very emotional. He's thinking about Fortnite.
Or I just need more coffee. I feel like our losses. Yeah, I'm worked up over our win rate these days. So, anyways, if you found value in this conversation, would you subscribe? We won't talk about Fortnite every episode, but you don't want to miss an episode. And also, take a minute, leave a review. Let us know this was valuable to you. Send us some feedback. Let us know some questions you want to talk to, and connect with us on social. Ministry.mix.
Ministry.mix on Instagram and Facebook. And we'll be posting not just the episodes and recaps of the episodes. There'll be other helpful content there that goes along with the episodes. So you definitely want to follow that. There'll be tons of resources and tools. And when we find something good, we'll share it with you there. So you can have everything we have.
Yep. Hey, come learn with us, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.